Top three headlines of the year. Sarah Jansen with World Almanac is tell us, and nice to see you again. What were your picks, and how did you pick them?
Well, the editors of the World Almanac, when they're looking at the top news stories of the year, they're looking at both stories that had a huge impact during 2014 and also stories that we think are going to continue to sort of build and grow and change the world in 2015.
Okay.
So that's what we were looking at when we picked our top news story, and that was the development in Iraq and Syria, particularly the growth of ISIS and the territory that they've gained in 2014. You know, at the beginning of the year, ISIS was a group that was considered, according to President Obama in an interview he gave in January, a JV terrorist group.
Right.
And that
obviously, he had not said that.
It obviously was not the case in 2014 that this was a JV group that we were looking at anymore.
Yes. So that was the top story, but you're talking about globally.
Yes.
And what comes in number two then?
Number two is also a global story, the Ebola outbreak, mostly in West Africa, of course, but then, of course, you saw it change. You saw healthcare workers being diagnosed. You saw a couple of cases being diagnosed in the United States, and definitely a lot of misinformation and panic. But I think the real headline from the story was, this is the worst Ebola outbreak ever, and there are a lot of global health organizations that were unprepared to deal with it.
Yeah, especially the World Health Organization was really caught flat-footed. But you're talking about, these were not only the top stories for last year, but also, like you indicated, these are stories that aren't over.
These are stories that aren't over. Obviously, ISIS is a situation that the United States military, but also the international community is really dealing with. And that'll continue to be the case in 2015 as that situation changes. Obviously, constant changes there.
And Ebola, I mean, we're still getting more news there, and we got a rumor out of Japan about a man there. We've got the lab workers that may so
right, constant developments, and again, the cases are constantly, the number of cases are constantly growing. Over 18,000 cases so far.
What's number three on your list?
Number three on our list is also a story that's going to be changing in 2015. We think it sort of started this summer in Ferguson, but it's sort of been growing ever since then. The shooting of one 18-year-old black man by a police officer sort of added to the violent protests there.
So you think this is going to continue as far as the question between minority neighborhoods and police?
I think that it's safe to say at this point that a lot of these stories are sort of being grouped together. The Eric Garner death in Staten Island in New York obviously was also being grouped with that. More demonstrations.
And so do you look at the stories as they go in and progress into 2015 as them being top stories, or how do you look at these stories as the top stories?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on what happens in 2015. Unfortunately, I would love to have a crystal ball to see, you know, what's going to be the most important story, but you never know when the news is going to break. And
I'd like to have that crystal ball, too.
I think we all would.
The news business.
Definitely.
Sarah Jansen, thank you very much for coming by and giving us your picks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, Phil